Hi, BJ.
All right, you're live. How's it going?
Good.
All right. So hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday to talk about academic assessment. Some of you know me, some of you don't. My name is Natalia Zagula. I am the Learning Assessment Coordinator at Goodwin's Office of Institutional Effectiveness. I help out our director and also help out program directors and faculty with assessment projects. I am joined today by some of our finest colleagues at Goodwin. Joining us will be Dr. Amy Boschman. She's the Chair of Academic Affairs and Associate Professor in the School of Applied Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. Dr. Lisa Minley will be joining us a little bit later. Most of you know she's an instructor at the Masters of Organizational Leadership, and she oversees online studies and the Center of Teaching Excellence. And then William, or BJ Kenyon, is the data analyst for online studies. He also works collaboratively with my office, which is the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. He works in helping in assessment and online assessment through an online software called Taxonomy. It also helps with Blackboard. All right, we'll go next.
So you ready?
All right, so some of you have already seen through Carrie's email that this is a workshop series. This comes in a series of 3 workshops in total. The purpose of it is to educate faculty and program directors on making data-driven decisions. The workshop is friendly to both newcomers and to faculty who have been assessing for a while. So you'll see at the beginning, we'll just do some basics and then we'll kind of get into the more advanced. We're going to combine some basic information with more specific advice, and we hope to provide you with some easy tips and tricks that you can incorporate in real time. So because this is an assessment workshop, we do have our own outcomes. So hopefully by the end of this workshop series, you'll be able to identify what constitutes a measurable outcome. You'll be able to write or revise student learning outcomes so that they are measurable. You'll be able to identify a key assignment in your course for assessment. You will create your own rubric to measure your learning outcomes. You'll gather assessment data, explain whether the assessment data is relevant, and then create a plan to improve your results from your course through the assessment data with easy and measurable steps. Next. All right, so what is academic assessment? So again, this is just a brief overview for any newcomers to this workshop. Academic assessment is the process of collecting information about a program or a course's performance, and then that information from the assessment is used to make decisions for improvement. So we see here a lovely diagram. We use this at the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. You see plan, implement, assess, revise. Essentially, what it means is plan. You create a plan for collecting information about how students are learning. Implement, you basically are collecting information about student performance on achieving an outcome on a key assignment. Assess, you're reflecting on the collected assessment data, where are students performing well or not so well, and then revise or closing the loop, you're making changes to your program to improve student learning. Next.
All right, let's see. Now, why is collecting that information important? Well, there are several reasons. One may think that students are learning a concept very well, but maybe the way the concept is being delivered to the students is not as effective as one might think. Maybe the students are not learning the concept at all. If we fall behind on understanding student achievement of a goal, the course falls behind in teaching students, and so does the program. Another reason why there is so much emphasis on academic assessment, and this is a big one, is that our regional accreditor mandates it in their standards. So we make it so. Really, we can just think of assessment like a doctor's checkup to see how well a program is doing. Like this analogy of the checkup, and because our regional accreditor, NECHI, encourages assessment, universities and colleges are more likely to catch up on not so obvious challenges within their programs. All right, that would be Amy.
Yeah, so now I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about how everything is connected and kind of how Goodwin does it. So at all universities, they have different levels of outcomes, and every school is a little different. I've been to a bunch of different conferences and seen the struggles that institutions have with putting outcomes together, and everybody kind of makes their own path, which doesn't really make assessment any easier, but it is good to be able to learn from other people. So at Goodwin, we have at the highest level institutional learning outcomes, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Currently we have 3. From there, you then have program learning outcomes. So a program should have their own learning outcomes that align typically with if you have one, an accrediting body, or what you want the end result of a student to have once they graduate. And so, for example, bachelor's in health sciences, they have an outcome that is communicate and present verbal, visual, and written ideas and information clearly and accurately in a way that represents competence and professionalism in the healthcare field. Not only is that a good program outcome, it also ties to institutional learning outcomes, which again we'll talk about in a minute. And then from there you have course learning outcomes. So every course that you have ties to those program learning outcomes and to those institutional learning outcomes. You can even go to a more macro level, which we also talk about weekly learning outcomes, and even some faculty like to create outcomes for individualized assignments. So it really can have this multi-level effect of how you're measuring that students are actually learning essentially what we say they are, what we want them to be learning. So it's very important to kind of understand how those different levels interact with one another. BJ, if you want to switch to the next slide.
Sure.
So at Goodwin, we have 3, and I was actually on the group that kind of developed them. And I will tell you, there was a lot of back and forth. We used to have, I don't even know, and some of the learning outcomes for the institution were not, the old ones were not measurable, which was a massive problem because one of the main things of assessment of outcomes is that they are measurable. So a few years ago, it was decided through a committee with Faculty Senate to create new institutional outcomes. I'm hoping at some point, and a few of you who were participated in this discussion when it occurred with Faculty Senate, I'm hoping at some point we'll be able to add a few more. 3 institutional outcomes is not very many, but to be honest, it's hard to assess them. So starting from with a smaller amount is probably beneficial. So there's communication. So can students effectively express and exchange ideas through various modes of communication? That's written, oral, and digital. So something as simple as an email, something having writing an essay, giving a speech, those all fall under this communication category. And as you all can attest through programs in your courses, students should all be able to do those in pretty much every class that we have on campus. Information literacy, this one is a little bit more specific. Identifying relevant information, evaluating alternatives, synthesize findings, and applying solutions. When this was developed, we want students to be able to essentially find information, to think critically, be able to answer questions. But there is a lot of buzz in regards to library and library support and the information literacy element that they can contribute as well. So it's kind of encompasses a lot of different things, focusing, in my opinion, on critical thinking. And then finally, to align really with Goodwin's mission, not that the others don't, but career readiness, so students will be able to apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities in their chosen field of study. And some people might say, well, how do we measure that one? That's really hard. It's really usually through a capstone course, a internship, or a clinical setting where those would be measured really well. All right, I think it goes off to Marianne. You had a question?
Yeah, so career services, they track the graduates and, if they're employed in their field. Is that data counted for the career readiness, or is it just like in-class stuff?
No, that could be counted as well. I know Career Services does a really great job, and we don't have Stephanie on here, which I know she was going to participate. But Career Services, I think, does a really great job, and they're really successful with the information that they gather. But I don't know that they get all students, and I also think that there's multi ways to be able to grab this information. Right now, I don't know, and Natalia, you could probably speak into this, what data we are gathering for these 3 different outcomes, because again, measuring outcomes at an institutional level is a very large process. And usually what you do is you take small chunks, and I know the focus last I had heard was on communication and really getting that piece assessed well. But I would definitely think that the information from career services would be beneficial to that, absolutely, especially in certain programs like Marianne, your program. It would probably be very easy to be able to track that information. You keep track of your you know your students, the fields they're going into, very specific things. So other programs that might be a little bit more difficult.
Thank you.
This is Lisa, by the way, and sorry I'm a little bit late, but I made it. I can also say that we just signed a contract with LinkedIn Learning, and it is official now, so we're going to have it for both faculty. It's for faculty, staff, and students. And so we can start integrating that as well into our learning. So some of the skills and such could be part of the learning community that LinkedIn offers. So that's another way that we can assess skills and knowledge in specific career areas. So just giving you a little heads up on that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to chime in just a second what Amy was saying. We have used student outcomes in terms of job placements and employer surveys to assess that outcome. So yeah, Amy, you were on the right track.
Alrighty, moving on. So one of the most powerful tools that we use in terms of holding ourselves accountable with student learning outcomes and assessment is the curriculum map. Program directors create these maps, and essentially the program directors look at the course and the major assignment in the course. They mark which program outcomes from the academic catalog are taught or discussed in which courses. Here on the slide, you can see an example of what a simplified map looks like. We're also really happy to say that almost all of our academic programs at Goodwin now have an updated curriculum map, so that is an amazing accomplishment. If you're an instructor who is curious to see what program outcome fits your course, you can send an email to Natalia, and she'll actually be happy to share that curriculum map with you. Back to Amy.
So you might be wondering, okay, now what? So I understand how assessment works in the process that or the different levels that we have, but what do I do at Goodwin to assess programs, assess courses? So assessment at Goodwin is actually mandatory, and many of you might be like, what? It is? I did not know that. It is mandatory for the programs. Excuse me. So every year the programs have specific requirements that they have to do. It's instructors, and correct me if I'm wrong, Natalia, the institution would like instructors to assess their courses, and it should be done, but I'm not sure that there's an official mandated process to that. If there is, I'm not doing it because I didn't know about it. But last thing I knew, it was specifically the programs. Am I right by saying that?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we have, and you guys might not be aware, but there is a committee on assessment. We've had a committee on assessment for a very long time. There was a brief hiatus with that, but it had always been running. And so it's a place where faculty provide this university committee on assessment advice on updating the process of assessment on campus. The committee will also have meetings hopefully in the next few weeks. And if you guys want to join, you can also let Natalia know. But the committee is meant to be a resource for people to be able to kind of, I think kind of change, and I think that there are probably many elements that could be incorporated in the committee. When I was at the last meeting that I had been to, a lot of the focus was really understanding assessment, how it's being done on campus, and hopefully I think eventually looking at data and helping people to benefit from assessment, like what we can do to enhance assessment. For instructors, if you actually, I'll start with program directors. I'm going to the right side of the column here. So for program directors, every October, a program director submits a plan, an assessment plan, that they assess 2 to 3 outcomes. Every plan is different for every instructor or every program. And some programs have, in my opinion, an easier time developing their plan than others. I say that from experiences. I used to be the program director for general studies, and that was a bit challenging. So then once you develop what your plan is, you collect data about student achievement of the outcomes of the program. That's kind of the focus. And then program directors reflect on the results of their assessment. So basically you have your plan, you take action with that plan, collecting the data from that, and then you reflect on that and say, okay, is there something that we can do to modify what we're doing? Are we on the right track? Are we doing the right thing? Where are our strengths and our weaknesses? What can we do to enhance student learning to ensure they're achieving those outcomes for the program to make the best program possible? And then that information goes to the Office of Institutional Effectiveness every August. So it's a year cycle. So it goes from October to August. And then on the instructor level as faculty, it's really a similar process. So as a faculty member, you do have to get a little bit work with your supervisor. While you're welcome to assess things within your course, if you are working on something that might be a little bit bigger or that has a larger impact where you want to make some type of change, you definitely need input from supervisors. So like if I look at an assignment I created and I anecdotally assess how my students are doing, I might be able to say, okay, I need to update my directions. I need to make changes to how I'm communicating that information or how I am expressing myself to students so they know what the expectations are. That is a very micro level assessment, but if you want something as instructors that is a little bit larger, where let's say you want to change an assignment in all of the courses within that course. So let's say I wanted to change a final paper in Social 101 where we run 10 to 15 sections every semester. I would need to get more people involved in that. So I could come up with an idea, talk with my supervisor about it, see what they think. From there, typically a pilot is done, so a pilot assignment or pilot activity to gather some data to see how it's going. And then you'd be able to look at that information with your supervisor and hopefully be able to implement some change into a course. So that's typically how it's done in those 2 different levels.
Okay, moving to the next slide.
I think I covered it. Yep.
Alrighty. So today's topic is, what are you navigating towards? What is your course or your program's compass? What is its purpose? What will students get when they complete all of their requirements? For this workshop specifically, we will focus on assessment at the micro level, or in other words, the course level for the purpose of simplicity. However, the lessons from this workshop series can and will be applied to a larger scale, such as program outcomes or even institutional level outcomes on the macro scale. Quite often, we simply have learning outcomes in our course and course catalogs because they are required and because we were asked to write them. Sometimes they aren't given a second thought otherwise. Program outcomes are so important because they define your program. They're literally the compass of your program. Program outcomes ask rhetorical questions like, what will students get when they complete all of their requirements? You can use program outcomes as a tool to determine whether or not students are learning in your classroom. Okay, so I have a little activity here. It's a little pretest. I went and got some program outcomes that I found on the internet, and some are better than others. So I'm going to do a poll in just a moment, and I would like for you guys to vote on which ones you think are the better outcomes. Shake it up a little bit. Let's see. Okay. All right, you guys ready? All right, we're starting.
Yes. Ooh, all right.
So how do we answer? Do we click on something or put it in the
Correct.
chat?
Click
Yeah.
on the one. Yep, you click on the one. Click on the outcome that you think is best defined.
I'm trying to. Well,
Well, it says poll results, and yeah,
Yeah, mine's not
we
letting.
could put it in. We could put it in the
No, mine's
chat.
not working either.
Okay.
I can't.
Something
Okay.
happened. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, we can just put it in chat.
Students will be given opportunities to learn effective. Students will be.
All right, so I am seeing a lot of twos. All right, I think that's everybody. So everyone has voted 2, which is correct. So good job. I'm gonna go ahead and do another one. I got 4 for you.
Okay.
So. All right, so which one of these do you guys think is best? All right, 2 it was again. Okay, let me prepare another one real fast here. All right, here we go. Are you sure you guys need this this session here? You seem to have it all already.
It's peer pressure.
Actually, we're cheating, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So here comes the last one.
Oh.
Let's see here. So we're a little more divisive on this one. So we have some 1s. We
I
have
want to
2
know
from
what Cindy
Michelle.
said about this one. Oh.
Marianne, you have a question?
Yeah, So the one before, it has the word understand, and like I see that a lot. When I came to Goodwin and online studies, kind of Howard and everybody, kind of Kevin and Eli and all, helps me understand, and even going through workshops through like Amy and stuff with Faculty Senate, I learned about the right words to use and understand. It just seems like I see that a lot of places, and it's like, and it's okay, but it's like, can you measure understand? Because then some
I
people will
love.
they'll argue and say, well, yes, you can. You can say students will understand the periodic table because you can assess them on, A, B, and C. But then others will say, no, 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 understand is a big no-no.
So I love that you ask, how do you measure understand? Because I'm on that boat when you say understand. Well, what's understand mean? How do you measure understand? I think Natalia can shed more lights on this, but understand in terms of what? So it's vague is simply the problem with understand. So we're looking more to kind of define an outcome. So what are you defining when you say they'll understand?
Well, I'm not saying
Natalia,
that I agree. I'm on the boat that you don't use understand, but there's people, bigger than me that say
yeah.
that understand is acceptable in an outcome. And I'm just was wondering what you guys thought.
Well, I'm going to tell you, this is Lisa. I'm going to tell you that it's not acceptable with many of the deans at this point in time. Maybe in the past, for somehow it got passed through, but it is not a true measurement. It is not. It doesn't indicate a level of what we're asking them to do. So we are looking to remove the word understand and find better words out there. So that's
Thank
what
you.
this is all about, is changing those words understand and moving to more of a Bloom's taxonomy or a Fink's or something that is more measurable.
Thank you.
Marion, I will also say, as the chair of the syllabus committee, when we get a syllabus that comes in and we look at student learning outcomes, if the word understand is there, it's typically something that we push back and say, could you be more specific?
Yeah, and it wasn't just here that when I said people bigger than me,
yeah.
I meant like outside of Goodwin that work with assessment in other schools.
Well, absolutely, because I don't think that, I find myself doing this, like if I'm talking to a student or if I'm doing something in regards to a student giving feedback or what it might be, the word understand is so easy to use, right? It's so, it kind of is all encompassing and broad. So
Right.
It's great. But when you're dealing with student learning outcomes, not so hot when you're trying to measure things.
Right.
So I think over time, and as you will see in this too, Bloom's does use the word understand as a broad category, and I think that enhances confusion as well.
That's
But hopefully over time, other people in other institutions will kind of get that. In order to measure understand, you have to be more specific of it. You might be able to measure it, but you have to be specific of what, as Cindy wrote in her notes, what are you understanding? What is it in terms of?
And I'm so glad that you asked that question, because we're going to talk about why that's maybe it causes issues, like in the next slide. But did anyone want to chime in first? Okay. Okay, so I guess we can move on.
Let's move on from the pretest. Really good job, guys. I think you guys know your stuff. So let's go on over to, who is the next slide? Let's see. All right, this is Natalia.
Awesome. Okay, so great exercise, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. Yeah, and it's very interesting participating in that poll, because sometimes ineffective outcomes are really obvious, and then sometimes they're not really obvious at all. So in this example, this is actually from the Illinois Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. they have an awesome chart, kind of like showing what is an outcome that's easier to measure versus difficult. So the first one that actually we had some examples in like the live poll that are a good example of this is an ineffective outcome is vague, so vague. So like for the first one is students will learn the programming language Python. Well, if anyone knows like kind of like the gist of what Python is, it's kind of like Excel in terms of you can do infinite options with it. So when you say that students will learn a programming language that does infinite options, like what does that mean? Like if a student just does like one code, does that mean that they learned it? Or do they need to know like something more advanced? So when you look to the right, there's a version of that outcome that is much more measurable and easier to prove that students are learning that. That one is students will use the programming language Python to complete a data mining analysis. So that's a very specific assignment. You can easily create a key assignment for that. So another example of an ineffective outcome, as we had already mentioned, I'm so happy that we even like mentioned the word understand, is that the outcome is not measurable and not observable. And I think that's a great example with the term understand, because understanding is not observable. Understanding is not an action, like a student cannot execute that. So, and similar to understand, we have like as an ineffective outcome that students will know the elements from the periodic table. So that again was like from the live poll earlier. But again, like what does knowing mean? That's like so theoretical. That's not an action. So maybe a more measurable outcome would be something with an action verb. So in this case, it would be students will be able to identify the elements from the periodic table based on their symbols. So again, that was an example from the live poll as well. And the reason why this one is better is because this is an action. Like students identifying that is an action. That's not like some theoretical thing that is very difficult to quantify or measure. Another example of an ineffective outcome, and it's totally okay that this happens, but it's just something to be cognizant of. I do see it a lot at Goodwin University and also at many other institutions while kind of like comparing notes what other places are doing. But some outcomes, like if they are like super wordy and you don't know what the outcome is just through reading it immediately, then that's ineffective, because when you look at an outcome, it should be simple, kind of like the acronym. It's like if you've known that or you've used that in your teaching, it's keep it simple, stupid. Like you should be able to read it and know exactly what is being said. So in the ineffective outcome, students will be able to, this one's very verbose. I'm not going to even read the whole thing. But the more effective outcome is students will be able to apply theories of social psychology to real world situations. Like that is something that, like for example, you could do an essay about that rather than look at the previous outcome and just read it over and over again and just being like, what is this trying to say? And then reiterating our message a little bit earlier that everything is connected. Your course and program outcomes should be connected in some kind of way. So that's kind of like the last example. Everything should be connected in some manner. So for that reason, sometimes you'll see like communication outcomes in a course or a program learning outcome. And that's perfect because it connects the institutional learning outcome. So those are kind of some key areas where you can make sure that your outcome is truly effective. All right.
Okay.
All right. So we got just one more example of effective versus ineffective outcomes. So again, with understand, understand is not measurable. It is again, theoretical. It's not an action that can be physically seen with the eye. So in this example, like in theory, say you have a conversation with this instructor who had this course outcome, and it turns out she really just wanted to focus on the history of cooking and like serving dinner, right? So in this example, like how can we improve this? Well, why don't students just describe the history of like whatever the policy of cooking and serving dinner instead of just understanding? Then we have another outcome: become familiar with the elements of baking cookies. What does that mean? It is very vague. It's too broad. So instead of that, we suggest for like a more measurable outcome that you use the word like identify, just to define the scope of what you want to see from the student. The next ineffective outcome is complete the assignment on cakes. All right, well, it's not really a learning objective. It's more of like a to-do list item. If your assignment helps to support your course objective, you should really create a learning objective that describes the purpose of the assignment. So like instead of complete the assignment on cakes, like what does that mean? Instead, like make it more specific, like what is the action that the student's going to do. So in this case, here an example could be like bake a cake that meets their client's expectations. Another example of an effective outcome is explain the benefits of various diets. So it's not really the verb that's the issue here. The issue here is that it's not student-centered. The instructor has described what they were going to do, what they're going to do to teach in the lesson, not what they wanted the student to be able to do. So in this case, maybe a more effective outcome would be determine the most appropriate diet for an individual based off of their preferences and health determinants. So again, making it more specific and less broad or kind of like a mystery. And then the last example is formulate a recipe from above. This is not a good outcome because you shouldn't have outcomes that relate to one another, or they should all be standalone and separate. Like you shouldn't be referencing outcome number 2 in outcome number 8. Like they should be their own separate individual thing. So instead, like a better outcome would be develop an original recipe for a cookie, cake, or dinner. So, all right, next slide. All right, so we looked at some measurable outcomes, some ineffective outcomes. Now we're going to look at maybe the logistics of writing some outcomes. So we have good news for you. We can make this easy. This doesn't have to be a mystery. So there's really 3 steps. It's really kind of just looking at what students will be able to, like we encourage that you use that kind of phrasing. Then that you pick a measurable action verb, and we'll have some examples of some measurable action verbs later. And then at the end, you should choose like a skill or knowledge, skill set, attitude, ability, something like that, that the students should be able to achieve by the end of the course or the program. Next. Great. Amy, take it away.
Yeah, so I imagine you all have heard of Bloom's. Bloom's taxonomy is like the go-to for picking action verbs when you're creating outcomes. All of the you'll notice when Natalia went over the different examples, all of them, I'm not sure about bake, but all of the others are definitely Bloom's words. But that does go to show that you don't have to pick exactly ones that are on the list. You know, Bloom's has been around for a very, very long time, and people have been using this to really kind of help students to create those measurable outcomes, to help students understand. See, there's the use of that word, but to help students understand the expectations of the course. So, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing, or of the program? You know, what I'm supposed to be learning. Some people use them regardless of the suggested course level. You'll notice in this chart there's different course levels. For this example, it does start with in the thousands. Some institutions, their course numbers are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. We, of course, are use the 100 method. We recommend you using them if you're thinking of improving or rewriting your program outcomes. Maybe you're stuck with language of what to use and how to create them. You can certainly come up with your own terms as long as they're measurable and action verbs. But it's a good guide. Also, if you're teaching at a higher level of undergrad or teaching at the graduate level, this shows a progression. And it can help you if you're trying to focus your students on creating knowledge and providing recommendations for like case studies and challenges. Using evidence. One of the things that is important to note, because I see this a lot when we review syllabi, a lot of people say, because I touched upon this about the different levels of a course, a lot of people will say, well, you are using identify in a master's level course, or you're using develop in an undergraduate course. One thing to really understand and think about when you're trying to develop a learning outcome, programmatically or course level, is really what's the end result? Like, what do you want your students to know? If it's a graduate level course, they might be learning new information. They may not have the knowledge already because you're still building upon their knowledge that they developed in an undergrad. So using a lower level action verb may be applicable. It just depends on what it is, what you're trying to have the students be able to demonstrate through their learning. And one thing that Cindy mentioned in the notes, you had said, Cindy, that seems like disciplinary knowledge is critical to writing measurable outcomes. In some cases, that is very valid. There are times where I have looked over learning outcomes and I may not know all the specifics of what is being requested of the student because it is very much specific to the discipline. And that's something that as content experts, you guys need to be able to do, because you have that knowledge and you have the information that you need to encompass.
One other thing I want to add.
Can
I just say something maybe on that? So one of the things as we build the courses, for ID work, rigor, as you know, is a key word that we look for. How much rigor, and as we go to graduate levels, how do we know the rigor is more intense for the higher levels? And so she's absolutely correct that even in a graduate level, there is going to be times when you're identifying new information. You need to describe that information. So it's okay to have that in a graduate level course, but there'll be more of the 500 and 600 level where they're actually then be able, once they identify these things, are able to then to compose or argue or develop from that information more information and more in depth. And that's where the rigor comes into play. So using those higher level action verbs.
Yes, absolutely. Cindy, I'm seeing your post. Let's see. Is there an argument to be made for the importance of higher Bloom's levels in 100 level courses? My experience is that's where the engagement is. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't, if you're in a 100 level course, I wouldn't focus on the 100 level verbs. There are times where it really just depends, again, like I mentioned, what you're trying to get your students to be able to demonstrate knowledge in. So there are higher level verbs that can benefit you. The thing or benefit the students, but the thing to think about is I'm trying to explain this from what I have seen. There are some 100 level courses that are too rigorous.
Yes.
There are some 300 level courses. I can give you a case
point. There was a course in the business side who had the very first discussion board was about arguing and comparing. And how do you do that when you don't even know the actual information? You don't know how, you haven't identified or described something yet to them. How can they argue or compare something on day one of a 100 level course? So that's That's what you got to be careful of. When are you placing that higher level? So Cindy, I say yes, you can use it, but make sure that they're prepared to be able to use it. So it's more later in the course than at the beginning of the course.
Yeah, absolutely. I have seen courses that are too rigorous and that are not rigorous enough. Specifically for my experience, 100 level courses to 300 level courses, and it's not in the best interest of the student. Yes, we want them to learn and to gain the information that we are teaching them, but it's not in the best interest of the student if, like Lisa's example was, there's an expectation and they don't even know how to get there because they haven't been taught that. And I think a lot of you may experience this. For me, that's a prime example for students. They'll come into my class and I'll say, hey, use APA formatting. And they're like, what is APA and why do? So in some courses, because my course is a 100 level and sometimes the first one they take, or close to the first one they take, where they don't have that background. And so sometimes you have to, make sure you include that. So it's the same thing with those, the learning outcomes. Anyway, I wanted to show you the next slide. BJ, if you can flip it, because it talks a little bit more about outcomes for online courses. So we're all experiencing this craziness. And Bloom's has a digital taxonomy, which focuses a lot on terms and actions for online courses. And you can kind of see, and I will say, the link that is provided, and I think, did you guys get the PowerPoint or will be getting the PowerPoint?
They will be getting it, yeah.
The link, okay, wonderful. The link that's provided has much more detail and is really very interesting. So I would highly recommend taking a peek at that. One of the verbs that they put, which I thought was funny, but with the times, I think it was under remembering, was Googling. So they included Googling in Bloom's digital taxonomy, and I thought that was humorous, but yet actually very accurate to what our world is. So it has the same different categories or different levels for lower level to higher order, but it incorporates things that you might not normally think of when you're talking about action verbs, and you can kind of take a look. So as you get higher up, uploading for applying, I mean, that's very interesting as we use Blackboard. There's also, which I thought was interesting, under evaluating is grading. That's an interesting one too. So there's another level. Thank you, Cindy, for your link that you have provided. I think, Natalia, maybe we can, we have this recorded, so hopefully everyone can see that. So I think that is a very interesting way of thinking about this taxonomy, very relevant to us right now. Okay, BJ, I think next slide, unless someone has any questions. All right, so how do you update your program outcomes at Goodwin? So the nitty-gritty details here. And this is coming from Syllabus Committee and Academic Affairs. And again, we talked about two different options, or two different outcomes that we will be using, that you would be using as instructors, as program directors. There's program and course, and they're kind of done the same way, sort of. So for program learning outcomes, if you would talk with people, potentially an advisory board, your dean, through assessment work that you've done, and find that maybe your program learning outcomes need some modification. Maybe they're not as measurable as you thought. Maybe the times have changed. Maybe they just need updating. Sometimes you might have too many. Whatever the case might be, you would develop new ones that usually get reviewed and approved within your program and department. So your dean would definitely have to see them. And then you would create a consent agenda. And for those of you who don't deal with academic affairs regularly, you just email me and I will give you the form, or it's on the faculty resources link in all of our Blackboards. And there's a form that you fill out, and you send it to me and say, hey, can you put this on the next agenda for academic affairs. Academic affairs takes a look and says, sounds good, we approve. And there are a few people, Cindy and Christina are on the committee. I don't know if there's anyone else. So you have seen the process for program outcomes. It's actually pretty quick because a lot of that hard work is done within your department, and you are content experts and know the best things for your department. For a course, it's a little bit more difficult. There's a few more people who have to look at it. So, and the visual that we have here is really accurate. You know, you do modify your outcomes, review it with faculty, you have them approved by academic affairs, and then you publish them. And however you publish them is a little different. Program outcomes would get published in the catalog. So for those of you who haven't experienced it, always knowing when the catalog is being updated is very important, because you want to have those in the newest version of the catalog. For a course, you have to fill out a new course form, and that goes through your dean. I mean, I can provide it to you, but you fill out the form, your dean brings it to the academic leadership team, the ALT, and they look over your student learning outcomes. And you might wonder why that happens. And part of it is because we as an institution want to get courses approved in Insanis as quickly as possible. And course descriptions and learning outcomes are things that need to, that have an impact on that. So it goes there, and then it gets the consent agenda and the new course form. Once approved, if any modifications need to be done, are done and then sent to me, and I put it again on the consent agenda in academic affairs. And just so you know, once it goes through ALT, it can go into SONIS. So your course can then be available to for students to register. The course can't run, but they can register for it. So you can make it, it kind of is the process up. And then, because as we all know at Goodwin, courses happen super fast sometimes. And then the final step, once it goes through the consent agenda and academic affairs, is the syllabi committee. A lot of people don't realize this, but the final end-all be-all of a course being able to run is the approval of the syllabus committee. So the syllabus committee looks at the course, really focusing on the student learning outcomes. We're not necessarily, a lot of people have the misconception that the syllabus committee really deals with the content. We are not content experts. Ms. Christina, I'm going to use you as an example. I hope this is okay. But she just submitted 2 syllabi for nursing courses, and 400 level and 600 level. There are nurses on the committee. Christina is actually on the committee, but we have someone from every department, and the reason for that is to help with the process of explaining something that the committee might not understand. But we're not content experts, nor do we think that we are. So we try to and I know I have to be quick because it's 4 o'clock, and I apologize to everybody. We try to be very open with what we're doing. And once we approve it, then the course can be run, and everything is good to go. And I will turn it over to, I think, Lisa, because I just saw the time on my phone. So Lisa, off you go.
I know. I guess I'm going to do a speed reading. All right. So guys, quickly. So this is just a little example of how we set up some of our courses. And as Amy, he must have said earlier, you know, sometimes you have courses like gen ed courses are not always mapped to a program per se. So this is the MSOL program course. So there's a course outcomes in here. There's 2 of them here. For example, discern human resource obligations as well as practices, examine ethical implications and current leadership issues. What we do, we add weekly learning outcomes. And so those outcomes for this particular one describe and reflect on the growth from the various courses taken in MSOL. So going back, right, looking at things, and also and identifying and comparing. These are just some elements that we're adding, not only as a course outcome, but also the weekly outcomes. So that's what you see in the courses as you're building these courses. Go to the next one, because I'm like in the speed time. So in this particular one, and I think I showed a wrong thing because it's not the one that is supposed to show it to grit. So So for some reason it wasn't the right one. Anyways, in this particular one, it was supposed to be showing about grit, and so as in the weekly outcome. In this particular one, then I show the articles, I show the video. So your weekly outcomes that you create should be linked then to content that is then going to be linked to your assessment. So we're looking at these different things. Go to the next one. And so here's an example. So the link, the assessment is actually discussion in this particular class, where they're going to talk about grit in their responses to their learners. I do a scaffolding of information each week. And so they have to add this component to it. Go to the next one. So quickly, so I can let you go. I'm sorry we're throwing this at you really quick. It's already 4:03. So what we're asking you to do, because it's a 3-part series, we want you to do a little homework. We want you to look at your outcomes first of what you have in there. Look at the existing student outcomes. Are they measurable? Look at, do your student outcomes tied to course learning outcomes? Do they actually tie to, do you think that they tie to institutional outcomes, the 3 that we talked about? And then look and see if there's key assignments in here as well. So we want you to kind of look over this course that you pick a particular course that you want to evaluate in. Go to the next one. Your job before the next session, which will be rubrics, visit one of your weekly student learning outcomes in your Blackboard shell. Pick one of your courses that you teach. Review the student learning outcomes and choose one that you feel is not measurable, and we want you to rewrite it. And you can send that information to us, it already shows you submit student learning outcome to Zagula. And then we will be taking that information for that learning outcome and then you'll be creating a rubric to measure the assessment that you're going to do. So you're going to get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to follow it. And sorry, I am like, everybody's got to leave. So is that the last one?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't give it a lot of time.
I will say, if anyone has questions, and I know the rest of you agree, Natalia, BJ, and Lisa, if anyone has questions on the assignment, the homework, or anything that, I'm happy. I'm sure the rest of everyone else is happy to help and provide support. So you can definitely contact us and get additional help, clarification on the assignment, whatever it is.
Okay, Natalia, I'll get those materials out this afternoon too, so everybody has it, so then they can read it in more detail and get everything they need for the homework assignment.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gary.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for putting this together. It was a great job.
Yeah, thanks all. Thank you, Lisa, PJ, Amy, so much for all your effort and your work. Thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at the next workshop.
Thank you.
And that is next week?
No, 2 weeks. Right.
2 weeks. Okay, 2 weeks. All right, good. So we all
Don't
know.
quote me. That's what I got. Bye.
I can look up the date.
I have it as the 23rd, I think. It's not next Thursday.
Let me check. 23rd, yep.
Yes,
Yep.
all right, 23rd.
Yep.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Take care.
Bye, thank you.